US.85 and US.86. These two state standards are very similar, so we're going to be doing them together. US 85 says that you need to be able to explain the significant achievements of President Richard Nixon's administration, including his appeal to what's called the silent majority and his major foreign policy actions. Also, you need to examine the Watergate scandal, including background of the break-in, changing role of media and journalism, legacy of distrust, United States versus Nixon, and controversy surrounding President Gerald Ford's pardon. So the first part of this is we have to look at President Richard Nixon once he was elected. And one thing that Richard Nixon did once he was elected is in a famous speech that's called the silent majority speech, he makes this reference to this new thing called the silent majority. And not a lot of people really get what that is, but what the silent majority is, what he believed that they were, he believed that it was the older generation who were against counterculture and supported the war in Vietnam. And what Nixon had done is Nixon had made this statement. He says, I'm supported by this silent majority. He said, the media gives a lot of attention to the counterculture movement. The media gives a lot of attention to the anti-war movement. But the majority of Americans don't do that. The majority of Americans are silently behind me, and that's the group that I represent. So the big thing about this silent majority is, they were silent. That's what they were called. They didn't make a lot of noise. So let's just put down they were silent because media, meaning newspaper, radio, TV, didn't give them a lot of attention. And so when Nixon becomes president, he says, I represent this silent majority. All right, these people that aren't really going to, raise their voice and speak out, and people that the media is not really going to discuss. Those are the people that I represent, and my policies are going to support this silent majority of Americans. The most famous thing that happened to Nixon is something called the Watergate Scandal. And the Watergate Scandal is going to be probably one of the most embarrassing political moments for the United States. And the Watergate Scandal is called Watergate because of the location where it happened. It actually happened in the Watergate Hotel. So let's just put down about the Watergate Hotel. That is the location of this scandal. And now the reason it's the location of the scandal is because of what was housed here. Okay, the Watergate Hotel was actually where the Democrats, the Democratic National Committee, is where their party office was located. So the Democrats, their whole party and everything that they believed in was centered around this block of rooms or whatever inside the Watergate Hotel. And so what happens is one night a security guard notices things aren't right and calls the police. Police show up and they find a couple burglars breaking into the Democratic National Committee's office. And it's kind of conspicuous because, when they're caught, there's some little bits of evidence that are linking them with the White House. And the reason Nixon was linked to this is Nixon is a Republican. And so, who else would have motivation to break into the Democratic's office than the guy that's running against them in the election? So once this, break-in kind of hits the news and the media gets a hold of it, the Senate is going to get involved, and the Senate starts investigating, what happened with this break-in, And one of the big things that happens is that Nixon testifies in front of our Senate he had no involvement. So Nixon says, I didn't order it, I didn't have any part of it, I'm no way connected to it. And he says that under oath. So he's been sworn in to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth. But he doesn't. Okay, and that's going to be kind of the whole detail that this whole Watergate scandal is going to hang on. So for a while, the Watergate scandal was kind of kept under wraps. It wasn't really blown up very big until these two guys down here in this picture are going to kind of get a hold of this. And so the two guys are Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And who these guys are, they are reporters for the Washington Post. And these two guys start to kind of look at the Watergate scandal, and they're kind of, just looking at it, and they're like, something just doesn't add up here. So they start digging, and they start investigating deeper and deeper and deeper. And these are the guys who kind of blew the top off this whole scandal, because what happens is they get in touch with a secret informant. And this informant is, come to find out years later, is actually from the FBI, and he's feeding them information about what's going on. And so these guys just blow this scandal wide open, and it becomes much more open to the public, and people start learning about it, and it's going to be a lot tougher for Nixon to hide and to truly prove he knew nothing about it. One of the key pieces of information in this whole trial is what is called the White House tapes. During the proceedings, they uncover that Nixon has recordings of every conversation he's had while in the White House. And, Nixon had these recordings, and, the Senate says, look, Nixon, we're not sure that you weren't involved. How about you give us those recordings, let us listen to it, and if you're innocent, you're innocent. And Nixon immediately refuses to give these up, which kind of makes you think, well, what's on these tapes? Is Nixon talking about Watergate? Is there proof that he did it? And it starts this huge battle over whether or not, are they going to release the tapes? So this goes on forever. Finally, Nixon's, made to release some of them, and then, he kind of handpicks the ones he wants to release. There's no evidence on them, but finally, in the end, Nixon is forced to release all of them. And so let's put down Nixon is forced to release. And it turns out that Nixon had ordered a cover-up of the break-in. He had ordered the FBI to stop investigating the break-in. So let's just put down that Nixon had ordered FBI to stop investigating. So right there, it's obvious that Nixon has a link to the break-in. And remember, he had testified under oath, I'm not involved, I have nothing with it. But these two guys right here, Woodward and Bernstein, are really going to be the two that kind of make this whole thing happen. All right, their ability to have this informant inside the FBI that's going to feed them information, their writings in the newspapers are really going to be kind of the catalyst, the accelerating factor in this whole court case. So a big date because of this court case is August 9th, 1974. And what this is the date that Nixon actually resigns the office of the presidency. So let's just put down Nixon quits presidency. And the reason Nixon did this is once it was kind of proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Nixon was involved with the break-in, he had lied under oath, Nixon knew there was a pretty strong chance that he was going to be impeached. And what impeached means is where, a president is, just to put it easily, is fired. Where the Senate and the House both agree that the president has, done something wrong and doesn't deserve to be president, and they fire him. And so Nixon didn't want to go down in history as being, a president that was fired, that was impeached. And so he just kind of hung it up and, resigned. And, here's a picture of him. He's leaving the White House. He's, all excited. I don't know why he's excited. He just, did probably one of the most infamous moments in American politics. But Nixon resigns on August 9th, 1974, rather than wait to be impeached. The last step of this whole scandal is what happens next. So once Nixon resigns, his vice president, this is him down here, Gerald Ford, is sworn in as the new president. So Gerald Ford was kind of, obviously Nixon's vice president. They were close. And when Gerald Ford gets sworn in, Americans are kind of curious as to what he's going to do. Is he going to, start kind of going after Nixon and trying to, put criminal charges against him for what he had done. Everybody's just kind of curious because there's a lot of, Americans are really upset with Nixon for what he had done. So Gerald Ford comes in the office, and guys, one of the first thing that Gerald Ford does is he pardons Nixon. He says, "Look, Richard Nixon did nothing wrong. I'm issuing Nixon a formal pardon for any wrongdoings that might have happened." And he lets him off the hook. And guys, let me tell you, this is going to make Americans furious. All right, they didn't want this to happen. All right, they wanted Nixon to be, tried for what he had done. I mean, this guy had lied under oath. He had spied on political rivals. He had covered it up by telling the FBI not to do their job. Americans want this guy to be prosecuted. And so what happens when he does nothing is it leads to a distrust in government. In other words, Americans don't really feel like they can trust their government. They say something's going on here. Why in the world would this guy Gerald Ford, why would he just pardon Nixon? All right, obviously we can't trust our government to really kind of, I don't know, represent us, to do the right thing. And so it has this legacy of leading to this huge distrust of government. People view the office of presidency different. And it really comes from this pardon that was issued to Nixon by Gerald Ford.